So one day I was scrolling on YouTube and I saw that leftist YouTube atheist number 3899, Hunter Baloney, reacted to Redeemed Zoomer's video, All Atheist Arguments Answered in 10 Minutes, and tried his best to make replies to said video. Spoiler, he didn't do too well, and most of his arguments either fall into some type of fallacy or are based on his lack of knowledge, based on a misunderstanding of a point, or are just poorly thought out and constructed arguments. Without further ado, let's get into this reaction inception of me reacting to Hunter Baloney reacting to Redeemed Zoomer.
Pausing this probably like obnoxiously because I'm probably gonna have to interject like every 5 seconds because I have a feeling that there's gonna be a lot of dumb shit here, okay? So just brace yourselves. Let's go.
Atheists have a lot of arguments, but they never really think of anything new that the church hasn't had answers to for the past 2,000 years. So let's answer them. Religion causes wars.
Is it the church answering things, or is the church the one making the exact same arguments for thousands upon thousands of years? And so atheist arguments have roughly stayed the same.
The reason the church makes the same arguments is because atheists rarely ever debunk the arguments they make. Most atheist responses to arguments made by the church tend to be very lackluster, with the exception of a few, as this video will show.
Like, which one is it? Which one came first, right? The belief in God or the disbelief in God?
The belief in God. And your point is, exactly? Since atheists rarely come up with good arguments, the church hasn't really been pushed to make tons of new arguments. So for the most part, it's at a stalemate.
If you were born somewhere else, you wouldn't be a Christian. Okay, and if you were born somewhere else, you wouldn't be an atheist. Everyone's beliefs are shaped by their context.
How do you know? Because atheism is not really a belief in anything. It's a rejection of a belief. It's a disbelief in something that is usually presented to you.
Yes, Hunter. And that disbelief or rejection of a belief is usually pushed by certain factors in your life. The average atheist didn't become one because they sat down and thought everything out. They became atheists either because their church hurt them, they were so uneducated in arguments against atheism that a low-level Reddit or YouTube atheist and their arguments were able to convince them, or because they never understood their religion in the first place. In most cases, good arguments against God only serve to reinforce an idea they already had, or that was already growing thanks to different factors affecting their life. The fact of the matter is that you, Hunter, are an atheist because of whatever unique factors in your life push you that way. If those factors change, for instance, you were born into an Islamic country, maybe certain factors might fall in place to make you an atheist, but the chances of that happening are low, unless you live in Iran. But I digress. What I'm trying to say is that you are the product of the secularization of the United States. If you were in a country which had no secularization and you grew up religious, the probability is you'd be a theist.
Now, atheists will say atheism is just a proposition. Atheism and nihilism are completely different things. Yes, atheism is a proposition, but that influences your entire worldview. We can look at the Pew Research. Atheists are a group that tend to think the same way on social issue, on politics, on science, on history, because it is a worldview. We can group atheists as a group for the same reasons we can group Christians as a group. They are in the same worldview. Yes, they may have some small disagreements, but they are part of the same group.
So, odds are you'd be an atheist regardless of the religion.
There's no scientific proof that God exists. Well, by definition, science can only prove things inside the natural world, and by definition, God is something outside the natural world. So science can neither prove nor disprove God. There's no evidence of anything supernatural.
Okay, maybe science itself cannot disprove God per se. That's why I say also that God is a non-falsifiable claim. However, the fact that science, the fact that we have a metric called science that can test the natural world, but we have no such metric to test for anything outside the natural world.
We do have a metric to test outside the natural world. It's called philosophy. Morality does not exist inside the natural world and can't be tested or studied with science, and so we use a different metric to study and test morality and ethics, and that is philosophy. That's why people make the moral argument for God. However, most atheists work on a completely naturalistic worldview and throw out philosophy as a metric or as any type of base for arguments for God, thereby throwing out a good handful of arguments for God.
Doesn't mean that science proves God doesn't exist, but it does force me to ask, why do you believe something then? Why do you believe this thing then?
Because there's evidence for it. You might not agree with the evidence, you may think it is unreliable, but it is there. As I go into this video, you'll hear me saying this on repeat because he doesn't seem to get it.
There's no evidence of anything supernatural. Well, that's just not accurate. There are medically documented cases of people with demonic possession speaking in languages they don't know, for example, and people with
There are people with schizophrenia who also are able to speak in languages that the other split personality might not understand. There are certain people, they've had people who have undergone brain issues where their brain is split and they have two separate personalities in their brain, and one side of their brain is religious and the other side of the brain is non-religious. How do you know this is demonic possession?
How do you know this is not demonic possession? Both of these things can be true. Both of these things can exist at the same time. It's not mutually exclusive. The main problem here is that Hunter is working off of a naturalistic worldview, i.e., that everything has a natural explanation and that the supernatural is not true or does not exist. However, I and other theists like Redeemed Zoomer believe that both the natural and supernatural exist, which allows for both of these things to coexist. So, Hunter really doesn't debunk Zoomer here. All that happens is that they have two different views of these situations because they have two different worldviews. Neither argument are completely convincing.
This could just be somebody going crazy. This is just like assuming.
near-death experiences getting information they never had access to. The Bible has contradictions. Okay, you think you found an apparent contradiction that the church hasn't known about for 2,000 years? Every apparent contradiction can be explained by understanding just a little bit of theology.
So no answer, just you go to church more. Go to church more, young squire.
Yes, Hunter, because that's how you learn about the Bible and biblical theology, Hunter. It's almost like the church is supposed to educate you on the religious text it's based on.
Oh my god! Wow!
Imagine how foolish it would sound if we replaced the Bible and theology with math and a math textbook in this situation. A hunter mocks someone for going to math class to learn more about math and understand the equations in their textbook. If it is the case you want resources that address these quote unquote contradictions, I'll be happy to provide links to them in the description.
The Gospels were anonymous. Okay, anonymous doesn't mean we have no idea who wrote them. It just means the names of the authors aren't signed in the text itself. But we literally have writings from church fathers who knew the apostles and can verify that they indeed wrote the books named after them.
Who cares if they were anonymous or not? The better question is, why do we care what these randos and their anecdotes are? Why do we care about that? That's the real question there.
It isn't 100% clear who he's talking about here, whether it is the church fathers or the apostles themselves, but I'll respond to both. In the case of the church fathers, we should care because these people were either the disciples of the apostles or the disciples of the apostles, meaning that they either knew the apostles who wrote the books or they knew the disciples of the apostles who wrote the books, making their opinion credible. This is because they either would have been trained by the eyewitnesses themselves or would have had access to the eyewitnesses of the events recorded in the gospel. In the case that he's referring to the apostles, we should care because these people walked with Jesus for 3 years. They were the first-hand eyewitnesses of Jesus' ministry and the last 3 years of his life. If we can't trust these people, we have no reason to trust any other historical document written. So in order to debunk the Bible, you end up debunking all of history. Come on, Hunter. You can do better than this.
The later one of the Gospels was written, the more divine it makes Jesus seem, so we can extrapolate that Jesus was originally a human figure who got made more divine over time. Alright, maybe some Gospels emphasize Jesus' divinity more than others, but what about Paul's letters that fully confess the divinity of Jesus and were also written before any of the Gospels?
I honestly haven't really heard any of these arguments before. I hope we get to some better ones soon. Wait a minute, is he doing that thing where he makes up the fake argument to debunk it and look really smart and big-brained?
No, he's not. The reason you haven't heard these arguments is because your knowledge of arguments against Christianity is still at Reddit level. If it wasn't, you know that New Testament scholars like Bart Ehrman, as well as many other better educated and knowledgeable atheists, have made this argument. This is only the beginning of Hunter being a great example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. In trying to insult Redeemed Zoomer, he has shown how little he knows in the realm of anti-Christian argumentations.
So that breaks your pattern. The Bible supports slavery. No, it doesn't. Just because there's slavery in the Bible doesn't mean the Bible supports it. There are some Old Testament verses that could be interpreted as condoning slavery, but Jesus himself said that the Old Testament made accommodations to people's sinful state. And also, slave owners in the American South had slave Bibles for their slaves to read, but it omitted a lot of the real Bible, so if the Bible actually did support slavery, this wouldn't have been necessary. Christianity.
So Jesus himself admitted that God, his Father, who is supposed to be all-knowing and all-perfect and all-moral, made accommodations for people's sinful state? If God could make accommodations for people's sinful state, then why the f*** did Jesus ever even have to die on the cross?
Another lovely example of Hunter's lack of knowledge when it comes to any sort of theology. Hunter, God making accommodations for people's sinful state, is not talking about allowing them into heaven. It refers to God working with humans on earth, specifically the nation of Israel. God was working with them to bring forth Jesus, the Messiah, so that he could die for the sins of the world. If you've read any part of the Old Testament after the Exodus, you'd know that the Israelites were a group of stiff-necked, hard-headed, stubborn people who God had to punish constantly for their actions. It was these people who God chose to work with, and because of this, he made accommodations or concessions to continue working with them so that he could get them to a better point morally. Hunter, you're a father. If I remember correctly, from when they used to follow you, your daughter should be around the age of 4. Let's say your daughter Rose wants ice cream or cake for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but you, as her father, knows that this is not good for her and you want to get her to a better point where she's more favorable towards fruits, vegetables, and better constructed meals. Would you A, give up on working with her and turn your back on her because she doesn't do everything you say when you say it? Or B, make accommodations to her sweet tooth by allowing her to have a slice of cake or a scoop of ice cream every once in a while after she eats her meal, even if it isn't the ideal situation, in order to get her to a better one? The situation between God and the Israelites is similar to that. You're so confident in topics you're so ignorant on. This clip from Inspiring Philosophy helps to explain what I'm getting at here.
If you read through the Torah, you will find some verses that appear pretty awful. The death penalty is applied for minor offenses, or things that don't seem worthy of death to us. Israelites are allowed to keep slaves, and women are not on an equal level with men. Skeptics often bring up these verses to show there are horrible things permitted in the Bible. So the Word of God contains some pretty immoral ideas. But seeking to defend the Bible, Christians often attempt to offer explanations for why we are misunderstanding these passages based on the cultural context or what the original Hebrew meant. But then skeptics often reply that it is the Christians who are misunderstanding what the passages are saying. So, as a Christian, I propose a compromise. Let's just say the skeptics are right. The Torah does contain numerous passages that contain immoral ideas, but also, God admits the Torah was never meant to be a perfect moral code. To begin, I want to point out this is part 2 of a series. So much of what I say here will be building on this previous video, where we point out the Torah was not a prescriptive law code or legislation. It was more akin to didactic wisdom literature, and was set up as a suzerain treaty. But why would God still allow the Torah to contain verses that appear to be okay with slavery or treating women as second-class citizens? Well, we need to remember, the Bible implies in many places that the Torah was not a perfect moral code from God. It contained concessions for stiff-necked Israel, and God even admits this. First, in Matthew 19, the Pharisees come and attempt to trick Jesus by asking him a question about the law of divorce. They ask why Moses allowed them to give a certificate of divorce and send their wives away. But Jesus replies, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so." This is a very important point made by Jesus. The law of divorce only existed because the hearts of the ancient Israelites were hard. God only allowed this for the time being because Israel was not at a point yet where they could be given more ethical marriage guidelines. Considering scholars note the Torah was to be understood holistically and not as individual sections, this implies some of what is in the Torah was included due to a compromise between God and Israel here.
Okay, if God could have just accommodated for my sinful state, why is he too much of a pussy to be in my presence because I'm sinful?
You have that the other way around.
What? The whole thing is that God cannot accommodate for sin. God cannot be around sin. He can't stand it. He detests it. That is the whole thing with God. That's why he had to send Jesus Christ, to build the bridge between us and our sinful ways so that we could be with God and seek repentance. That's the whole gospel. So if God was able to just accommodate for sinful states, then we never needed to have the gospel to begin with.
Wrong again, Hunter. You're literally just talking out of your ass here. Like I said before multiple times in the video, Hunter just takes what is being said, misunderstands it, makes a point based on that misunderstanding and runs with it, which makes his whole point easy for me to debunk because his point isn't even true, it's based on a falsehood. So like I said, you're wrong, Hunter.
Second of all, it literally is God himself saying that you can get slaves and it's okay to beat them. Like, it's God deliberately saying this. Now, maybe he's going to say, well, the Bible was written by men, so maybe it was a mistake, you know? Oh, well, if you can't decide which words were from God and which weren't, then I think we can just disregard this.
Christianity supported slavery. Well, sure, some Christians did, but all human civilizations have had slavery. Christian civilization was the first one to abolish it on moral grounds. The fact that you're against slavery is due to Christian influence. Also, most
Whether it is or isn't is literally irrelevant to me. So let me tell you something. If somebody believes that aliens used their magic fairy dust to create humans, and that's why humans are really special, okay? Because this fairy dust is limited. There's a limited supply of this fairy dust. And so these aliens created humans using fairy dust. And because we were made with this limited thing, that gives us immense value. And because of this, now I am motivated to build hospitals, accommodate for people, and fight against slavery. All of these things are good, but it doesn't mean that aliens really did create us out of fairy dust. So just if the belief inspired some good outcomes, doesn't mean that the belief itself is true, or even good, or even right.
The argument being made here is not because Christianity abolished slavery, therefore God real. The argument being made here is specifically against the argument that Christianity has supported slavery. Come on, Hunter, you're supposed to be a debater. You got to be able to pick up on stuff like this. I mean, for crying out loud, it's right there on the screen. I can't tell if he's being purposefully deceptive or if he's just that ignorant.
It just means that you made it to the right conclusion.
Also, most organizations fighting modern-day slavery are Christian. God killed tons of people.
Well, yeah, that's because they have to make up for the past. Got him.
In the Bible. Well, it's actually way more than that. God numbers everyone's days. He's the giver of life, so he can take it, especially if people sin.
Because God gave life, he can take it? Okay, literally by that definition, my parents should have the right to murder me.
Blatant false equivalency. God and your mother are not the same, Hunter. This shouldn't even need to be stated. Your right atheism is showing. Your mother gives you life by giving birth to you. God gives you life by breathing his very breath into you. He's the one who sustains you even as you curse and scorn him. That gives him every right to take your life when or as he sees fit.
Atheist countries are more prosperous. Yes, it's true that Northern European countries are very prosperous and very secular, but correlation doesn't equal causation. It's not like atheism causes prosperity, it's that prosperity causes atheism because when people have comfortable lives, they don't feel a need to depend on God. But why are these particular countries so prosperous in the first place? They may be secular now, but they're rooted in generations and generations of Protestant Christianity. If you want an example of a country that's atheist and not rooted in Christianity, look at communist China. There's 4,000...
You just got done saying that it's correlation, not causation. So how do we know that it's not correlation with the prosperity and the religiosity? What can contribute to prosperity? Usually it's accepting reality and accepting the facts surrounding you, because that's the best way that you're able to adapt to your surroundings and progress and, yes, prosper, okay?
Editing Richie here. I was watching back this part of the video and wanted to address something Hunter says here, specifically what contributes to prosperity. He mentions things such as accepting reality and accepting the facts around you as contributing to prosperity. Notable exceptions from this list are access to education, access to medical care, being part of a local community, etc. Things that are quantifiable rather than these abstract concepts that he provided. And if you look at these quantifiable factors, you'd notice the church had their hand in many of them. The church founded hospitals, they founded colleges and universities and other learning institutions, and the church has also been a good source of community. Obviously, I could go on and talk about all the different factors that would actually contribute to prosperity and relate them to how the church has actually in some way contributed to them, but this was just a short point I wanted to make. Anyway, back to the video.
But we know that Christians and religious people are less likely to trust science and factual information, particularly if this factual information contradicts their preconceived biases when it comes to their belief in God.
Citation needed. And even if you did have a study to prove it, I would question it because a lot of studies like these are usually done in America and are studying people like American evangelicals, who we can by no means say represent most Protestants, let alone most Christians. Also, atheists don't reject science when it contradicts their preconceived notions when it comes to their disbelief in God. All people have a bias towards their preconceived notions, and there are studies that show that theists tend to be more aware of their biases than atheists. Also, when it comes to Christians or religious people not believing science as much as atheists do, that's simply not the full story, and boiling it down to, well, they just don't want to listen because it contradicts their fairy tales, is a great way of greatly simplifying a complex topic of why certain religious people are skeptical of science, scientists, or scientific dogmas. This video goes into more on that topic.
They are more likely to reject science. They are more likely to be scientifically illiterate because it could threaten their little fairy tale belief. That doesn't contribute to prosper. That hurts people. That holds people back. That's how we get a bunch of these chuckle who are up here screeching that being gay is a sin when everyone else is just like, can people just live their lives freely, please, as long as they're adults and it's consensual? Like, why do you give a shit?
Being gay itself isn't a sin. Homosexual acts are. Additionally, just because two people consent to something doesn't make it right. Consent based morality is faulty and ultimately falls short. If a man wants to be a cannibal and another man wants to be eaten by a cannibal, and both these men come together in their right minds and sign a contract that gives both their consent for these actions to take place, i.e., the cannibal gives consent to cannibalize the man, and the man who wants to be cannibalized gives consent for that to be done to him, and they go on to commit these actions, is this right? Is this moral? On consent based morality, it would be because both of them consented. But if not, it shows that there is a standard of morality above consent. If that is the case and committing homosexual acts breaches this higher morality, should we not be against it?
That's the reason why. Whether you want to say it's correlation or causation can virtually never be proven unless it's literally like in a lab and you're looking at it under a microscope, or you have a really, really tightly controlled or a tight-knit control group. Things like this, you can then demonstrate causation. Everything else is correlation, but sometimes correlation is okay. Sometimes correlation can tell us some things. So why are these countries continuing to prosper? And as they continue to prosper and get better and better, they become more atheistic. You're saying because they're comfortable and they no longer have to believe in God?
Yes, and he's right. He hasn't been the first person to recognize this, nor will he be the last. Nietzsche also recognized this in the 19th century. This is where his famous quote, "God is dead and we have killed him," comes from. According to Wikipedia, the meaning of this statement is that since, as Nietzsche says, the belief in the Christian God has become unbelievable, everything that was built upon this faith, propped up by it, grown into it, including the whole European morality, is about to collapse. This was the 19th century German worldview, where science seemingly caused the death of God, Christianity, and Christian beliefs, even though these things are completely compatible. The people in Germany at the time believed that the scientific facts about the world disproved God, and therefore began to abandon God and religion in turn for science. Christianity caused science, science caused prosperity, and prosperity caused atheism.
Or could it just be that when more people are progressive, they have more access to education? When more people accept science, they're less likely to believe fairy tales.
Ah, yes, the old only uneducated people and science deniers believe in God. Yes, let's ignore the multitude of brilliant scientists currently working in the field who are Christian and who became Christian because of science, and among them people like John Lennox. Let's ignore all the Christians and theists in general of the past who've contributed majorly to science and its advancement through their endeavors. Let's also ignore the multitude of educated people who still believe in God, also calling religion fairy tales. So edgy. Not to mention the fact that most of the times when used, the term science denier is a slanderous term used to discredit people who question the dogmas of the scientific establishment. Questioning the thing that is needed to do science correctly. Saying stuff like this only further proves that there's a bias when it comes to theists in science, which only pushes more theists away from science. Would you look at that? A self fulfilling prophecy.
There's 4,000 gods that people believe in, and you're atheist to 3,999 of them. I just go one god further. Okay, this isn't the gotcha that you think it is, because the question of whether some sort of god exists is fundamentally different from the question of which religion is right about God.
If God created everything, then who created God?
Wait, he's not going to answer the question?
If God created everything, then who created God?
Well, God is defined as the uncaused causer. Everyone knows there needs to be a first cause at the beginning of the chain of all events in the universe, and it makes a lot more sense for that first cause to be a personal God who caused things for a reason, rather than some random...
Everything has to have a first cause in the universe. God doesn't have a cause, though.
That's because everything doesn't need a cause. It seems you misunderstood what was being said here. Either that or you straw-manned it. I'll admit, Zoomer could have been a bit clearer with his language, so I'll clarify. The point being made here is based off of one of St. Thomas Aquinas' arguments for God, that being the argument for the unmoved mover. I'll try to simplify the argument as best as I can. Aquinas basically says that we can observe that some things move or have a cause. That's the difference. Hunter said everything, and no, this is not a game of semantics, as these words make the argument. Everything encapsulates, well, everything. Some things means that they are exceptions. Aquinas also says that because some things move, we know that there must have a mover, and because there can't be a mover going back infinitely, there must be an unmoved mover or uncaused first cause. This is basically the argument. Now, this is not the full argument, but a part of it, the part of it which relates to what Zoomer was saying.
So this is begging the question, is what this is. You are baking the answer into the original statement, thus making it circular. So who caused God? God is the uncaused causer. It's like saying, hey, it's bedtime. Why? Because it's time for bed. It's like, basically that's what you're doing right now. God is the uncaused causer. Why? Because that's how he's defined. Why? Because that's how he's defined. Says who? God. It's all circular. It makes no sense.
It does make sense. Like I said, you just started off with the wrong foundation. Obviously, if you start with the belief that everything needs a cause, then the argument becomes circular and illogical. However, if only some things need a cause, then the argument becomes logical. Additionally, the reason God is the uncaused first cause is not because that's how he's defined. The reason is if some things need a cause and the universe had a cause, we can then argue that the universe is not an uncaused first cause, meaning that there needs to be something or someone which itself had no cause and which caused the universe. I'll let Inspiring Philosophy elaborate.
There is an argument used against the existence of God that is by far the worst objection I've ever heard. You won't find it used among professional philosophers, but instead, I tend to encounter it in great amounts online among laymen. When theists argue from cosmological or contingency arguments that God created the universe, the worst reply a skeptic can make is,
who created God?
What created God?
If God did indeed have a beginning, by the simple logic of cause and effect, there had to be an agent, separate and apart from the effect, that caused it.
So then I want to know where God came from.
Who created God? Who created the person who created God? Who created the person who created the person who created God?
Design is dead, otherwise one must explain who designed the designer.
Who created this God?
This, in my opinion, is by far the worst objection ever made by a skeptic. And I don't even need to appeal to theistic philosophers to point this out.
I can refer to atheist philosophers like Michael Ruse, who highly agrees. Now, for those who may be wondering why this is such a bad objection, the basic reasoning is there is no thought put into it. Just because we can argue the universe was created, that doesn't mean we imply that everything needs a creator to exist. How the skeptic can make this leap is beyond me. No theist argues everything needs a creator. Look at the very simple Kalam cosmological argument. The first premise is not everything has a cause, but that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Obviously, we're not implying everything has a creator, but only things that have a beginning. My favorite cosmological argument, the Leibnizian version, makes this distinction very clear. Anything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external explanation. So again, just because some things like the universe have an external cause, that doesn't mean everything that exists must also have a cause. God would be by definition of the first category, a being who doesn't need an external cause and is necessary. Because of this, asking who created God is equivalent to asking what caused an uncaused thing. It simply is nonsensical. Basically, cosmological arguments have pointed out for centuries that since contingent things exist, like us, our existence can only be explained by appealing to external causes. However, this cannot go on infinitely. There has to be a first cause, an unmoved mover, which started this chain. Whatever this is, it would be necessary, not needing to be created, which is who we theists would then call God. So when theists argue the universe has a cause or an explanation, we are saying this infers a substance or a being that would be the first cause and is uncreated and necessary, which we theists then argue would be who we call God. This is not special pleading, since the first mover would be uncaused by definition and defined differently than contingent things like the universe. Look at it this way. The atheist philosopher David Hume said the universe was necessary. If you would have gone to David Hume and tried to refute his theory the universe was uncaused by asking if the universe is the explanation of our existence, then what created the universe, he would have simply replied he stated the universe is necessary, and therefore didn't need a creator.
God is the holocauser.
Impersonal, caused to be a personal God who caused things for a reason, rather than some random impersonal force.
Why does that make more sense? We already know there's random impersonal forces in the universe.
But can a random, uncontrolled force create complex, intelligent life? That is the question.
We already know that these random impersonal energy sources or whatever can actually be sucked into black holes and expand, and sometimes things can be created by mixing chemicals and things that seem almost as if there is nothing. Suddenly something comes out of this when the right chemicals, the right energy, the right kind of atmosphere is introduced. This happens sometimes. Not to mention, we know how vast space is. So the odds and the likelihood of a black hole sucking some chemicals in enough so to expand something and have some kind of a universe generated or created there is far more likely than some all-knowing, uncaused causer just floating around outside of time and space itself? Like, what?
Mind you, all this that Hunter's talking about is theories. Specifically theories which relate to the multiverse or pocket universes, something yet to be proven and which would prompt the asking of more questions, which would probably lead to people still believing in God, just that he created the multiverse. Also, he redefines nothing into some sort of chemicals, a tactic which atheist scientists have used in order to describe how something can come from nothing. Also, more likely, can I get the statistics of that? Because it just seems like you're believing that based on your own personal incredulity. I can't believe some uncaused, omnipotent being floating outside of space and time did it. Therefore, space chemicals and forces did it.
Science disproves God. Well, actually, the church invented modern science. All the founders of the scientific revolution deeply believed in God, and medieval theologians laid the ground.
So, remember how you talked about how when somebody is religious and they commit a violent action, it doesn't actually mean that their religion is the reason why? Remember you talked about that at the beginning of this video?
Yes, he did, Hunter. The difference is the church invented science for the exact purpose of knowing God better, not in spite of God or in spite of Christianity, and that processes like the scientific method are based on presuppositions which came from Christianity. You'd know that and would stop making dumb arguments like this if you'd shut up, listen to the whole point, understand, and then properly think of an argument. You're listening to respond rather than listening to understand. And yes, I understand the irony of that statement.
I don't care if some of the inventors of modern science were Christian or religious. I don't care.
And medieval theologians laid the groundwork for modern science by saying the world was governed by an intelligent creator. That means we can understand the world with our intelligence. And studying God led to studying the world because the world is God's creation.
God is just used to fill in.
Then why are some of the things that science is discovering disproving the things that the Bible says happened?
And of what are you speaking, dear sir? Do tell.
That's the next question. So now we have scientific, we have the ability with science to go on archaeological digs and then analyze things we find and test them. And they've done this. They've gone through the desert regions where Moses apparently led the 600,000 Israelites out of slavery, and they found no evidence that there was ever any civilization there. Certainly not 600,000 people crossing through or staying there for a bit. They never found any evidence of this. So is that science disproving the Bible? No, but it's science casting doubt on the Bible and its accuracy.
Okay, let me stop you right there.
I'm gonna stop you right there, Patrick. Yeah, hold your horses, Patrick.
There's a debate over how the verse should be interpreted. The literal version of the verse is that a census counted 600,000 men, which scholars have pointed out that including the women and the children would produce over 2 million people. Obviously, this is inconceivable, and the Bible thinks this too, seeing as the Bible describes Israel as a small nation and tells them not to fear the bigger nations like Egypt, whose population was estimated to be around 2 to 3 million at the time. This 600,000 number comes from the fact that the word which is used to mean thousand could also be used to mean a tribe of people. So using context clues from the Bible, as well as looking at what a big nation would have been back in the time, we can make an educated guess that there were way less than 600,000 people, let alone 2 million people. For more information on this, you can watch these two videos by Trent Horn. Additionally, you bring up that science, specifically archaeology, disproves biblical events is extremely freaking rich, seeing as your go-to example of this is always the Exodus, which is a bit more of a controversial event and one that happened in the Bronze Age. Therefore, a biblical event we're going to have less evidence for, instead of something which happened in the Iron Age, which tends to have more and better extra-biblical sources to support it. Not to mention, I've shown how Hunter uses a solely literalistic interpretation, most likely based on his ignorance to support his point. This reeks of cherry picking, and when it comes to archaeology, it proves biblical events more often than it disproves them. For instance, archaeology proved that Pilate, or Pontius Pilatus, was real when they found a ring and a tablet with his name engraved in them in the 60s. Mind you, prior to this, people like you thought that he was just some made-up character the Bible used. Additionally, since you like to bring up the Exodus so much, science has proven and shown that the account of the parting of the Red Sea, or more accurately, the Sea of Reeds, is not only possible, but that it can happen exactly as the Bible describes, with a strong wind pushing back and parting the waters. For more on the ways which archaeology has proven the Bible, see this video by Matt Baker or Useful Charts. And just a warning to atheists who love to make the claim that archaeology disproves the Bible, just don't say it. You will fail. You've done it multiple times before, and you've failed, and you will continue to fail if you make the same mistakes.
The gaps of things that science can't explain yet.
Well, actually, God is the reason for everything, even things that science can explain. It's not one or the other. It's not like everything's explained by either science or God, and the more science can explain, the less God can explain.
So this is when you just add God into everything. It's like God of the gaps, but even more unnecessary. In this case, this is just, there aren't even gaps. You're digging a gap, and then you're filling it with God. It's like, hey, here's this natural explanation as to how this thing happened. Yeah, but you see, God set that natural thing in motion, so actually it was God.
Yes.
Like, it's not even God of the gaps. You're just adding God.
Really, science can explain almost everything, but God is still behind it all, because science explains the how, and God explains the why.
If God is good, why can't he destroy all evil?
What? Doesn't explain the why. Science explains the why more often than not. Science helps us understand the internal mechanisms as to why certain things are occurring.
Hunter, that's the how. You've literally made his point. Science explaining the internal mechanisms is literally science explaining the how. If a student mechanic inspects and tests a car, that can only tell you how the car works, how the acceleration or movement is created, how the pistons pump, etc. Philosophical thought, or in this case common sense, tells you why the car works, and that is that an intelligent designer and creator made it so that it would. However, I can understand this mistake, as it seems Hunter is mistaking the big why, which is what Zoomer is referring to, for the little why, which is like why the sun rises and sets every day.
God is good. Why can't he destroy all evil? Well, he eventually will. Why?
Okay, I'm frightened, to say the least.
Why can't he do it now? Because he'd have to destroy you. Why does God let any bad thing...
Why doesn't God destroy evil, the wickedness, the child rapists out there? Because then he'd have to destroy you, bitch.
Yes, you would. I'm sure you're knowledgeable of original sin.
How do you know that God isn't evil instead? Well, because evil is not a thing the way good is. Just like cold is just a lack of heat, and dark is just a lack of light, evil is just a lack of good. And for good to be objective, it needs to come from God. So a God who is objectively evil...
Which God's objective good, by the way, cannot even be interpreted by humans. Keep that in mind.
So a God who is objectively evil is logically impossible. Can God make a rock?
It's not even logically impossible. It's impossible within your own circular reasoning. Why does good have to be in accordance with God's nature?
The meaning needs to come from somewhere. God, the good, the bad. There are no ethics on your atheist system. You said you don't believe in anything unless it's in the test tube. Philosophy. Atheists have completely abandoned philosophy. They say it's unnecessary. It's stupid. Don't do it. Why? Because it presupposes metaphysics and a certain type of God, the revealed God. Atheists have abandoned philosophy. They say philosophy is dead because they can never be epistemically justified. But in this, they contradict themselves. Instead, they try to explain everything with physics, with all this stuff. But again, there are things that are assumed prior to doing science that you need philosophy for.
Why did God let evil exist at all? So he could be glorified in defeating it.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the best part of the video. It was so good that it was the part that Hunter used as a preview for his video. So let's get into it.
Triumph over evil is a greater good than evil having just never existed.
What? Says who? Is that a famous quote, or is he literally just like making shit up right now?
Well, you see, Hunter, because you're a literal Dunning-Kruger, you don't know about any of the good arguments for and against God. As I've said before, your argumentations are Reddit level, i.e. so BS that the best atheist scholar would not even think of using them.
Triumph over evil is better than evil? What? The evil that exists is resulting in more people dying and more harm.
Why is harm bad on atheism? If we're all monkeys made of space dust and there's no meaning to life or to anything, why does harm matter? Additionally, it should be noted, if Christianity is true, people don't really die. They just get transported to another realm or dimension, whichever you wish to call it.
You're telling me that it's better for more people to die and be harmed, for kids to get cancer, for terrible weather events to wipe people out? You're telling me all that's better because one day God will defeat it? That's better than that just never have happening?
It can be argued, yes. Allow me to give an adequate equivalency of the point that I'm born from Jordan Peterson. Mind you, it was on a different topic, but I digress. Jordan Peterson once asked, who's more moral? A man who has no power and has no negative effect on the people around him, or a man who has power and purposefully controls it so that he does not negatively affect people? Is the man who has no power good because he has not the power to affect people negatively in the first place, or is the man with power good because he has the power yet he controls it? The same concept is being presented here. Which is better, the lack of any bad thing or the presence of bad things for a while, the eradication of said bad things, and the restoration of good things, might I say, to a point better than they were before.
He's just making shit up. He's unironically just pulling shit out of his ass. This is so I didn't realize we were watching like Christianity for special ed class. I did not realize we were in this department. Think about how narcissistic and deranged that is. Can you imagine any person, anybody, anything acting this way? It would be f***ing insanity. Your syndrome in The Incredibles, where he created the robot and sent the robot in just so he could then swoop in with his little remote control and make himself look like the hero. God is that guy right now.
The difference between anybody acting this way and God is that God is omnipotent and omniscient. Ever think for a second maybe there's something he knows that you don't? Additionally, the difference between God and Syndrome is that Syndrome is not omniscient and omnipotent, not to mention the fact that Syndrome manufactured evil for the distinct reason of saving people so that he could profit and benefit. In the case of God, he did not manufacture evil, rather he allows evil from human beings to happen because to stop evil would mean getting rid of free will or to destroy us, as Zoomer notes early in the video. This is the response to the problem of moral evil. However, Zoomer can't use the argument about free will because he believes in Calvinist predestination. As it pertains to the problem of suffering, see this video. Also, read the book of Job. I'll also make a critique of Zoomer here because I don't think the argument he's glorified in defeating it is the best argument even when factoring his Calvinistic beliefs. I think there are better arguments to rebut the question of why does God allow evil, and I think arguments such as this one just opens you up to easy attacks from atheists. The other argument which Zoomer presented and I defended, which is that triumph over evil is better than evil never existing at all, is a much better argument as it presents an actual philosophical thought that filters out mid-witted atheists like Hunter while actually presenting a good philosophical point for more intellectual atheists to grapple with. To a fool, wisdom seems like foolishness.
That's the image of God you're giving me. Dude. Holy. Triumph over evil is better than evil never existing? I feel like this guy thinks he's like super philosophical and deep and everything and like making all these like novel insights when really he's just saying like the most deranged, stupid shit.
Hunter, you believe men can be women. I don't want to hear that from you.
He's probably high off his rocker just thinking he's having these groundbreaking, eye-opening moments when in reality he's just having moments where he breaks further from reality.
Religion is just wishful thinking. Well, if that were true, then the Bible wouldn't be all about how much we all suck. Psychology explains...
Yeah, we all suck. That's the religion I want to believe in. I want to believe in the God that allows kids to die from cancer because one day when he comes back in the clouds, it'll look really cool and pretty and fancy.
Again, I say, if Christianity is true, kids who die from cancer don't really die. They're just transported to another realm. One which is many times better than our current reality, and on atheism, on an atheist worldview that says we're all just evolved monkeys created by space dust, and that we're all just here by random chance with no purpose, why is children dying of cancer bad? And before you call me facetious or accuse me of not caring about kids with cancer, that's not what's happening. I'm simply questioning you as to why you believe these things are bad given the presuppositions that your atheist worldview is built on.
And then maybe there'll even be like a rainbow or something, you know? Totally worth the school shooting.
Psychology explains why you believe in God.
True! This NPC is a based one.
So what? If God is real, we should expect there to be some psychological or social benefit to believing in him.
No, there's an evolutionary reason why. We tend to view God as like a super parent. We always are sort of searching for someone to take care of us in a certain way and meet our needs in a certain way. When we're kids, when we're little, we see our parents and they take care of us in every way. But when you get older, you still want to be taken care of in a different kind of way. And that psychological desire exists because of evolution, because we're social creatures, because forming social connection is really beneficial, but it also allows us to conceptualize of a sort of super parent.
There being an evolutionary psychological reason to believe in God doesn't comment on the true or falsity of God's existence. Just because there's a psychological and evolutionary reason as to why we believe in a God, it doesn't mean that God is therefore not true or not real. At most, the psychological reasons might be able to disprove the gods we humans believe in, but not that the entity of God doesn't exist. And when it comes to Christianity, we believe in God because he has revealed himself throughout history, first to the nation of Israel, then through the person of Jesus.
Faith is the opposite of logic and reason. No, it's not. Faith just means trust. Anytime you eat food, you're having faith that it's not poisoned, even if you can't.
Wrong, because we trust to, sure, okay, fair enough that there's a level of trust there, but we trust a certain and specific process. We trust that there's an FDA process, for example, making sure that our food we're eating isn't poisonous and isn't going to be a detriment to ourselves. That kind of thing we can trust, and it's not faith in this thing, but it's that there's actual evidence you can look at. You can see their research. You can see the results of their analysis, etc. What you're talking about is having trust in something where there is no mechanism. There is no analysis. There is no result that you can then look at. There is no evidence.
What are you talking about? Of course we have evidence. The Bible. And I can already hear the retarded Reddit atheists laughing. The Bible? Evidence? Yeah, sure. But the four synoptic gospel contain records from eyewitnesses of Jesus' life, and it is the best recorded and preserved document from the times of antiquity. Hell, even atheist New Testament scholars agree with the Bible's accuracy of the life of Jesus when it comes to the more non-miraculous parts. Now, if you want to question the validity of the Bible as evidence, feel free to do so, but don't say that we don't have any evidence, because we do. Not to mention the empty tomb.
You're just having trust in this thing you've conceptualized that you call God, that you've sort of explained you've explained his character in a very circular way so that you don't have to really make sense as to how God exists forever when everything else has to have a beginning, but God just somehow doesn't. We'll make an exception for that.
Hunter, classical atheists used to believe the universe is necessary and didn't have a beginning, until we found out it had a beginning. So obviously, believing that there had to be some uncaused first cause or something that is eternal and necessary isn't illogical, even for atheists.
You very much have you've lost the plot. And it's because there is no evidence. There is no mechanism or anything foundational to look back at and be like, here's the evidence.
Yes, there is. The Bible and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The Bible records that Jesus rose from the dead, and this belief was attested by multiple people, with the woman at the tomb being the first to attest it, which, if you were writing a fake story back in that day, you wouldn't do, because a woman's words were counted as less than that of a man's. And in Corinthians 15:3-7, Paul records, "For I delivered unto you first of all that which I also received, how that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he was seen of Cephas, then of the 12. After that he was seen of above 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain unto this present, but some are fallen asleep. After that he was seen of James, then of all the apostles." End quote. The two most influential objections to the resurrection are the hallucination hypothesis and the disciples just lied, neither of which makes sense. For the hallucination hypothesis to work, we would need evidence that multiple people ranging from 2 to 500 must be able to visually, auditorily, and physically hallucinate the same person in the same way at the same time, doing the same thing all at once. For this hypothesis to be true would basically be a miracle, so you would be left with two miracles, and the one you believe in would just be the one which your preconceived beliefs drive you to believing in. And the "they just lied" hypothesis states that the disciples literally just stole the body and made everything up.
Well, as you know, Jesus is dead. But stick with me, okay? Stick with me. I have a plan. We are going to steal his body.
Okay, I'm tracking with you. What's next?
And then we're going to tell the whole world that he rose from the dead.
Oh, you know I'm in.
I love it already.
All right, classic. Then what?
And then we're all going to get brutally murdered.
However, this doesn't explain why the disciples would literally just go to their brutal deaths proclaiming the gospel, all the while refusing to retract their statements.
Wait, come again. Could you go over that last part real quick?
Oh, what? We get murdered. What's the problem?
I like it. I like it. I mean, don't get me wrong, Pete. I love me a good hoax as much as the next guy, right? What's in it for us? Do we all get riches, fame, and fortune first, right?
No, get this. You're going to be hated, persecuted, and reviled for the rest of your life!
Okay, guys.
So again, I say, saying we have no evidence is false. To question that evidence is fine.
This is what's contradicted. Instead, you kind of have like the Bible that's really subjective and up to interpretation, and have a lot of different people sort of feeling different things, and some of them think God told them this, and some of them think God told them this. We trust that our food is safe because there's a rigid process of standards that these things must go through before they're deemed safe for human consumption.
Scientifically prove it. If you're married, you have faith that your wife loves you, even if you can't scientifically prove that. And if you try to...
If she marries you, you can kind of have a reasonable trust, sure, that they love you. But again, that's evidence.
Scientifically prove it, she'd probably get very mad at you because it would mean you didn't trust her. You really think God made billions of galaxies with billions of stars in each of them just to have a personal relationship with you? Yes.
Well, yeah, you also think God invented a bunch of evil and allows evil and allows kids to die from cancer so that he can show off how cool he is one day. Okay, well, my atheism hasn't been defeated, but my will to live certainly has been.
I'm going to ignore Hunter's snide comments at the end since they've been addressed already. With that said, this video and my mental torture at seeing Hunter being an ignorant Dunning-Kruger of a midwit using horrible Reddit tier arguments comes to an end. Next time, Hunter, leave the arguing to a more knowledgeable atheist, someone who's actually educated in these topics and who won't fall into the trap of committing fallacies left, right, and center, like Cosmic Skeptic, for example. And one last thing before we end off, I just wanted to point out this stupid comment in the live because the only people more misinformed than Hunter is his audience full of yes men. And this person says this dude doesn't realize that religious scientists were treated like garbage by the church, so the church loved and hated science. No. Anytime it is brought up that the church basically invented modern science, some atheist is always going to scream, "What about Galileo and Giordano Bruno?" And when they ask this, they have already fallen into my trap without knowing. Since all I have to do is point out the historically accurate truth that neither Galileo nor Bruno were persecuted for their scientific beliefs, but instead were punished for theological statements which were considered heretical. In the case of Galileo, when he proposed heliocentrism, the church was fine with it, being presented as a theory which had to be later proven. Wow, how scientific of the church! However, Galileo asserted it should be accepted as a fact and asserted that the Bible showed and proved heliocentrism. It was that statement which he was punished for, along with the fact that he was fond of insulting the Pope. In the case of Bruno, he denied several important tenets of Christianity, specifically Catholicism, for instance, eternal damnation, the Trinity, the divinity of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and transubstantiation. Do I think the church was right for this? No, but the church is made of humans, and humans are corrupted, imperfect, and make mistakes. Big mistakes. With that being said, I hope all my other viewers liked the video and like seeing me torture myself. If you did, please hit like and subscribe and comment in the comment box down below. With that being said, I'm going to hit the sack and take a nap. God knows I need it. Richie, signing out.